Hey there, Mudroomers, it's Carmen here. I just wanted to get some stuff together to make a video to talk about this month's featured combo glaze. This month we've been featuring Galaxy, so we have a combo sheet made with 12 different combinations showcased at Cone 6 as well as Cone 10 reduction. If you haven't seen the social media posts that I've been posting, I've been kind of trying to showcase all of these different test tiles to show you all the different performance properties of this glaze. But if you don't want to go back and look through all the posts, or if you haven't been seeing them, I just thought I'd compile all of the information into one video so that everything you need to know is exactly in one resource. So definitely stay tuned and keep track of all the posts that we put throughout the month, but I think I'm going to be doing kind of like a glaze profile of each of our combo glazes, just to kind of help you guys out and just to have a little bit more conversation about these glazes. So to start out, I'm just going to go over the basic firings of Galaxy. So here I have my jar. I'm going to apply a coat of Galaxy to kind of show you how the glaze works straight out the jar, so you kind of know what to expect. But first I wanted to go over a couple different properties of the glaze. So first I'm going to go over different firing temperatures. So as you know, all of our stoneware glazes have a recommended firing range from Cone 5 all the way up to Cone 10. So there's a lot of variation with that firing range. And with that, you might be wondering kind of what it looks like at the different temperatures. So I actually have all of them showcased right here. So first we'll go over our Cone 5 results. Here we have Cone 5. We've got 1, 2, and 3 coats, and then just straight up 3 coats on the back. As you can see here, it's not quite as shiny as it would be at Cone 6. You can see, we can just compare these two actually. So we have a little bit more gloss at Cone 6, as well as these crystals smooth out a little bit more. So you always have a bit of texture with these big crystals here, but you can definitely feel it a lot more on the Cone 5 than the Cone 6. So that's not honestly super surprising to me. Just more heat work is going to create more gloss in your glaze. And a little bit more melt in your crystals. You can see here with the crystal comparison, you have quite a bit more crystal bloom here than you do here. You can definitely tell that this glaze is a lot stiffer at Cone 5 than it is at Cone 6. That being said, if you are doing a Cone 5 firing and say you add a hold onto your kiln, that could bring up your heat work enough to produce these similar results that we've achieved at Cone 6. So again, this is just with our kiln, with our slip cast body and our hand and firing environment. So keep in mind your results may vary, but this is like a nice ballpark to kind of work with. So if you are getting results like this at Cone 5, then you might want a little bit more heat work, or if this beautiful, like soft, a little bit matte sheen finish is something you're looking for, then just a straight Cone 5 firing is perfect for you. You can also see that the color development is a bit different. Here at Cone 6, we have a little bit more translucency, I would say, whereas the Cone 5 results here are a little bit more opaque, which again just kind of goes along with the different amount of heat work. So this glaze will be a little bit sensitive to the difference between Cone 5 and Cone 6. Not all glazes are sensitive to that, but this one in particular seems to be a bit. So again, I'm going to show the 1, 2, and 3 coats comparing Cone 5 and Cone 6. And so hopefully you guys can catch what kind of shine we have on each of these. But yeah, so really nice glaze. I love the way that the crystals bloom in it. And then so here we're going to go ahead and showcase our Cone 10. Here I've got it with Flux, which I'll go ahead and talk about with you as well. But I'll go ahead and kind of to compare the Cone 10 and Cone 6 results. So in-house we're typically firing to Cone 6, so this is what I or what we consider to be a standard. So I'm kind of just like showcasing the variance from what our standard is. So here you can see the cone 10. You still get a really, really nice gloss in there. And then the crystals smooth out pretty much entirely like that. I don't really feel them at all. I'm not sure if you guys can necessarily see in the video the lack of kind of texture with these crystals compared to the cone 6 results, but these crystals really did melt into the base glaze here. So again, this is cone 10 reduction. Sorry, I didn't put reduction on the tile here, but this was a reduction firing, which you can kind of see in the way that these blue halos are performing. I would anticipate that is from the reduction more so, turning this kind of like orangeness into some blue, as well as just having a blue hue in the fired results. So here we'll have, so this I have 1, 2, and 3 coats. This I just have 3 coats on, so I'll just compare the solid coverage from each side. As you can see, this does break over texture. It does that at low fire as well, because the base glaze to this is one of our ice glazes, which is basically just like a transparent glaze that has a bit of color in it. So the base glaze is very, very, very stable. You can do 3 coats, you can do 6 coats, it's not going to move, you're just going to increase opacity with the performance. The thing that's going to create movement with this glaze is going to be the crystal loading. So you can kind of see on our combos so all of these combinations that we have featured here are very, very heavily crystal loaded. You can see by how much of this kind of like orange variation is, and that's this orange from the crystal kind of melting into the glaze. So you can see this was very heavily loaded, and that does create a lot of movement with the glaze. Specifically, I guess on this area, you can kind of see where it started to pool a little bit. But the crystal loading is what's going to cause the movement with this glaze. It's not going to be caused necessarily by how thick you apply the glaze itself. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when you are applying this glaze, because you can be really, really liberal with it if you would like to have a more opaque or darker coverage. But just keep in mind where you're placing the crystals, how large of crystals you're getting placed on it, and where they're getting placed. So maybe if you do really like this, don't focus a lot of crystals on the bottom, or you could just have a piece like these awesome combo cups that have a little lip that will catch any runoff or any movement, which is really, really nice when you're not quite sure how a glaze is going to perform. And then we can go ahead and talk about the flux results. So here we have our flux. It's 401 on this side and 402 on this side. So we have light flux and dark flux underneath SW156 fired to cone 6. So I applied 2 coats of light flux, 2 coats of dark flux, and then I applied 3 coats of Galaxy to the tile. And you can see the difference between here is very, very subtle, mostly because the base glaze, charcoal, is not a very reactive glaze. Like I said, it is basically a clear glaze with a little bit of color in it. So this will influence a little bit of the movement, but you're not going to really create a lot of color variation. And you can see how it does definitely make the crystals move more, which is not surprising. And then on this side, we have a similar test. We have light flux, dark flux over SW156. So I applied 3 coats of 156 and then 2 coats of each of the fluxes. Here, this almost makes even less of a difference than this makes. This being underneath it really makes that glaze slide down over top of the flux, kind of leaving a little bit lighter glazed area here. Whereas this, the flux melts down on top of the glaze. So you can kind of see some of this brown stuff here. That's going to be the dark flux. And the light flux, you can't see any specks of it, but you can see how it lightens the glaze up here and then adds movement to your crystals. And then at cone 10, we have our light flux and dark flux. This is over top of 156, so I did 3 coats of the Galaxy, 2 coats of flux, 2 coats of light flux, 2 coats of dark flux. And this light flux shows up a little bit more than it did on this tile, actually, which is kind of surprising. But it does create a little bit of variation, and you get some blue variation here, which is really nice, instead of that brown, which the blue kind of goes with the crystals. And then you do get the crystal movement, which you would anticipate at cone 10 anyways. So this is Flux over top of Galaxy at cone 10, and this is Flux over top of Galaxy at cone 6. And then I have it here showcased on top of some different clay bodies we'll kind of go over. Here I've got it just on a speckled brown. The glaze fires pretty well over top of this. There's not really a lot of adverse texture. We did do a 10-minute hold on this kiln here, just to help alleviate any pinholes. There are still some minor pinholing, but nothing too serious, and no blisters or anything that's gonna cause any glaze to be flaking off your piece, which is the primary thing you're kind of trying to focus on here. The crystals look great. Here we have it on a white speckled clay. This performs great as anticipated. Usually I don't have as many issues with the white speckled clays as we do with the darker speckled clays. So a nice smooth finish. You can see the speckles through the clay, kind of showcasing a bit of the translucency of the glaze. And this is a very heavy crystal load. As you can see, it got a little bit of movement because of all those crystals. So definitely keep in mind what you're doing with the crystals. And here we have a dark brown clay body, which is typically kind of the problem child when it comes to glazes, I found. You get a lot of blistering and a lot of surface issues depending on what glaze you're putting on top of it, but it's well worth the testing because these clays are just so beautiful and really bring out a little bit extra something with the glazes that you can get to work with it. So this, again, just like we did with the brown, a cone 6 with a 10-minute hold. We do have a little bit of surface texture, but again, it's nothing that's necessarily detrimental to the seal or the finish of the glaze. There's no blistering. It just looks like, you know, it's just reacting with the base a little bit. I do love how the dark clay body darkens up and really makes this base glaze very, very rich. So it looks really, really nice on this, this dark brown clay. Okay, and so then here we've got all these combos. I just kind of wanted to showcase how nice these are. I've posted these on our social media, as well as we have them all on our website for printable combo sheets showcasing cone 6 and cone 10. This is olivine over Galaxy. And then here we have Coral Sands over Galaxy. I love this beautiful float that happens. A lot of the Norris Blue, Sand and Sea, Coral Sands, and Frosted Lemon always produces this beautiful kind of frosty float in the glazes, and I love it in combination. Here we have Macadamia over Charcoal, which this macadamia kind of will showcase some orange with the glaze, kind of have that rutile, which really matches the crystals. So I think that these go together really, really well, adding a bit of this orange mobility all around the crystals. I think it looks really, really nice together. And then here I want to showcase kind of how a matte glaze works with it. So this is Indigo Float over top of Galaxy, which the matte glaze kind of does take over the finish, but we do have a little bit of pops of gloss, which I really, really appreciate the variation that happens when you have contrasts with your finish. So that's really nice. There is a little bit of bubbling, as you can see. That could be due to the heaviness of the glaze application. So you could test around maybe adding a hold or something to alleviate that, or maybe just doing one coat of the Indigo Float over top of the Galaxy. That might help as well. So all of these are things that might be different in your kiln, so I just wanted to kind of go over them so that you have the tools how to troubleshoot any issues that you might run into when firing not only Galaxy, but just any glaze. So here I'm just going to showcase just what this glaze looks like out of the bottle. So we've got our jar of Galaxy. I've already mixed this up, but I do have a video on how to mix up crystals into your crystal pints. All of the crystals are going to be concentrated on the bottom, so I like to use the back of a brush, or even better, a spoon, to really mix up the crystals into here. But I've already mixed them, so I'm just going to give this guy a good shake. And as I've mentioned previously, with any crystal glaze, a lot of the time it's very helpful to scoop it out onto a plate in order to make sure you're accessing all of those crystals. This glaze is actually kind of thick, so it's not as difficult to access all of the crystals. So let's see. So I've got my glaze mixed up. I'm going to stir it with my brush, and as you can see, a lot of these crystals really stay suspended in this glaze. But it really is kind of good practices just to use a spoon and scoop it onto a plate, specifically just so you don't end up having a really high concentration of crystals at the end of your pint. So if you want to have your crystals distributed evenly through your pint, it is really helpful to scoop it out onto a plate. If you don't really mind and you happen to have a pint of charcoal or whatever base glaze you're using, and you just want to kind of like reconstitute the concentration at the bottom by adding the base glaze, that is 100% awesome actually, because then you have more glaze for your pints. I'm going to take a spoon and scoop this out onto a plate. These crystals are easy to access, but again, like I said, just making sure you're really evenly distributing those crystals is really nice. So you can see there were more crystals at the bottom than I pulled up with my brush. Honestly, sometimes the glaze, like having all this glaze to pull through, as you can see, like I start to scoop it up and it's really heavy, and as the glaze runs off, I lose a lot of crystals. So the crystals don't necessarily stick to your brush, especially when you're pulling them through a lot of glaze. So this is a really good technique to ensure that you are getting maximum crystal coverage and also a very even crystal distribution. So I'm just going to apply a couple coats so you can see how it goes on. As you can see here, lots of crystals to access if I want them. I'm going to scoop them from the bottom. This glaze is a little bit on the thick side, which is really nice for applying the crystals specifically, as well as having a really full even coverage. Since this glaze is a bit transparent, having it go on a little bit thick is very helpful to ensure an even application. So there's one coat there. Do another coat. As you can see, I really like to scoop this glaze up and then kind of spread it on the surface. So I really like to almost like, I think of it kind of like spreading peanut butter. You know, if it gets a little bit too thin, then you start tearing apart your bread. At least with crunchy peanut butter, that kind of is an issue. So just make sure you're really kind of laying it on the surface and not pulling it across the surface. I really advocate for this technique for all of our stoneware glazes, except for clear glazes. But generally, for the most part, I would say applying more glaze, it makes the product look better or richer. Unless you want some lighter coverage like I showcased here, you know, if you do want a lighter gray, that of course is an option. But doing technical, a lot of the issues that I run into, more often than not, is just simply apply some more glaze. So that's kind of why I wanted to showcase applying a coat on here as well, just so that you guys can really see a visual. So I'm just gonna let this dry a little bit. You can see that it's still a little bit shiny. So once this is not shiny anymore, I will go ahead and apply the second coat. All right, it looks like we've gotten our first coat to dry a bit. With these crystal glazes, you are going to have a kind of concentration of glaze around the crystals, so you don't need to wait for every morsel to be dry. But as long as the majority is dry, then you're good to go. So I'm going to continue kind of scooping up that glaze, spreading it around like peanut butter. And then just letting it dry. So keeping in mind that these big crystals are going to have concentration of glaze around them, I like to take my brush and kind of, you know, spread out that pooling that happens around the crystals. This is going to help with even glaze coverage, as well as kind of repositioning my crystals. So like, let's say all my crystals were all in one little area, using my fan brush to kind of brush that glaze out, but also kind of move the crystals around, which is really helpful, just to make sure your crystals are spread out evenly on your piece here. And then we'll do the back. Really scooping that glaze on. And making sure our crystals are nice and even. So that is coat 2 for Galaxy. I'm gonna set this down and let it dry, and then we'll come back and do a third. All right, so we're back here for our last coat. This is mostly dry again. The pooling around the crystals is a little bit glossy, but I'm going to go ahead and apply more glaze. This glaze goes on pretty thick, so I'm really not worried about anything being glaze starved, as well as the fact that I am a heavy glazer. So I'm getting a lot of crystals here, so I'm just gonna dip into the top of this pint, you know, get a little bit more glaze on my brush. Got a little bit too much glaze on my brush, put a little bit on the back here. So here we go. This side has a nice even distribution of crystals. And then on the back, gonna go ahead and load it up. Like I said, this is a pretty stable glaze. Your crystal concentration is your primary concern. I have got a nice test towel here with a little catch in case I do have any movement, but this is very similar to how this looked. So this kind of loading, you can expect a similar result. There's a lot of small little crystals in there, so it looks heavy, but those small guys don't create much movement. The big ones do. So the concentration of large crystals will be kind of what you're really focused on. And so that's all I have for you guys today about Galaxy. If you have any questions, feel free to add them in the comments. I would love to answer them. If you like this and want to see more glaze profiles, please let us know as well. We're working on how to best serve you guys in the new digital age where we can't interact face to face. So any suggestions are certainly welcome. We love hearing from you guys. And yeah, so happy glazing. Thanks so much for tuning in.